Welcome to today's Explainer. We're stepping right into a theoretical genetic laboratory to test exactly where we draw our moral lines on human enhancement. We'll be using a really fascinating chapter from the philosophy gym to build a progressive, Socratic-style tutorial on critical thinking. So let's just dive right in and see how a seemingly simple choice can trigger an absolute ethical avalanche.
But to truly evaluate the ethics of genetic engineering rationally, well, we first have to bypass those paralyzing historical bogeymen. Whenever this topic comes up, people immediately shout, Hitler or Frankenstein. And honestly, those nightmarish visions completely stifle any logical debate. So let's intentionally put those extremes aside for a moment so we can look at this with a clear, level head. To do this, our source text introduces a fictional but highly relevant Socratic dialogue. It's between a geneticist named Professor Susan Clone and an expectant mother, Mrs. McDadd. By walking through their conversation step by step, we can progressively map out exactly where our own ethical boundaries lie.
Section 1. Choosing your child's sex. A simple choice.
So Mrs. McDadd's first request in the lab is actually something that's already technologically commonplace today, using IVF to select her baby's sex. She wants a girl. But right away, this creates a philosophical clash. On one hand, you have philosopher John Harris, who champions freedom of choice in reproduction as a fundamental liberty. On the other hand, Professor Jonathan Glover warns that allowing this free choice could create a really dangerous demographic imbalance for the next generation, especially if a society heavily prefers one sex over the other. Glover actually takes it a step further with a pretty fascinating point. He argues that choosing a baby's sex based on a preference is an inherently egocentric choice. It's made entirely for the parents' benefit and their own lifestyle desires, not for the child's sake. After all, there's no general truth that girls are somehow happier than boys, or vice versa, so the child literally gains nothing from this selection.
But Harris counters this. He argues that even if some people make the selection for the wrong reasons, well, that doesn't justify denying the choice to everyone else. Any societal imbalance could be fixed with less coercive mechanisms, like simple tax incentives. Which leads us to a massive critical thinking pause. If we accept this foundational liberty to choose a child's sex, what exactly is next on the shopping list? Where do we draw the line?
Section 2. Engineering Health and Intelligence. Biological Tutoring.
Let's step back into the lab. Mrs. McDadd immediately raises the stakes. She asks the professor to ensure her baby has above-average intelligence and built-in immunities to diseases. And this brilliantly illustrates a concept from John Harris. What if genetic enhancement is just biological tutoring? Think about it for a second. If we applaud parents for sending their kids to great schools to enhance their intelligence, why is using medical science to achieve the exact same educational and health results considered illegitimate?
The difference, of course, lies in the method itself. Unlike schooling, programming these physical traits requires something called germline modification. This means altering the genetic code in a way that is passed on from generation to generation. Basically, any genetic changes, or devastating mistakes, made today will permanently alter the human genome for eternity.
We really have to separate two things here. Altering somatic cells, meaning changes made to a regular adult body, just affects the individual consenting patient. But tinkering with the germline, that forces massive, unpredictable risks upon all future generations without their consent. A single error could be catastrophic, introducing new behavioral deficits or vulnerabilities that might not even show up for decades.
So yeah, the risks are absolutely huge, but let's flip the perspective for a minute. Imagine we knew a specific germline change could forever eradicate an extremely debilitating, painful, life-shortening condition. If impartial scientists proved it was safe, wouldn't it actually be a moral failure not to delete that gene? Is it criminally overcautious to refuse to cure a genetic disease just out of fear of hypothetical side effects?
Section 3. Cloning the trophy child. Designer accessories.
Because the slippery slope rapidly steepens right here. Mrs. McDadd now requests a clone of a famous singer, Anita Sopwith-Camel, simply so she can show the attractive child off at the shopping mall. Philosopher Hilary Putnam finds this thoroughly repellent. He argues that in this scenario, we're reducing children to mere lifestyle accessories, just like a designer handbag. We'd be using our own children as a means to boost our own narcissism, rather than valuing them as independent ends in themselves. And this brings us right to the precipice. If we allow parents to design children for shallow, aesthetic, narcissistic reasons, essentially creating a society of designer children, we inevitably bump directly into the darkest shadow of genetic science. How is this consumer-driven pursuit of physical perfection ethically different from the historical horrors we promised to put aside earlier?
Section 4. The Shadow of Eugenics. Confronting History.
Okay, it's time to carefully confront that historical bogeyman. The Nazis used genetics in pursuit of racial purity, which was morally abhorrent. So how does weeding out genes for disability or designing for health actually differ? Well, the source text makes a crucial fundamental distinction. Using genetics to weed out a disability is morally different from declaring that people who currently have disabilities shouldn't exist. We're not saying people with disabilities would be better off eliminated. We are merely suggesting it would have been better had they not been born with their specific disability.
To prove this isn't some radical new evil, consider this. Mothers routinely take folic acid at conception, specifically to reduce the probability of having children with Down syndrome or spina bifida. That is a form of selection. But we consider that responsible parenting, not malicious eugenics. If that is acceptable, why is genetic engineering inherently evil?
Of course, we absolutely must remain on guard against politically motivated abuses of science. But here's the critical Socratic question for you. Every single technology, from the sewing machine to the space rocket, can be abused by bad actors. Does the mere fact that a malicious regime could abuse genetic engineering mean we must rationally ban it entirely for the parents who just want healthy kids?
Section 5. The Price of Immortality. The Ultimate Upgrade.
Moving past the eugenics debate, Professor Clone offers Mrs. McDadd the ultimate biological upgrade, turning off the natural ticking clock of the aging gene, meaning the child could live for hundreds of years. But widespread immortality creates a collective nightmare, disastrous overpopulation. If generations never die off, resources collapse. So the source proposes a pretty chilling societal compromise. The only way to safely allow long-life genes might be a strict legal condition forcing the recipients to undergo mandatory infertility.
Take a step back and look at how rapidly we've traveled down the slippery slope. We started at step 1 with a simple, highly relatable request for a baby girl. We moved to step 2, enhancing intelligence like a biological tutor. Step 3 took us into the realm of cloning for vanity. And now, at step 4, we're looking at the complete biological reinvention of the human lifespan paired with government-mandated sterilization. It escalated fast, right?
Section 6. A new biological class divide. GM humans versus the rest.
This escalating menu of options brings us to the ultimate, inescapable societal consequence. Professor Clone brutally points out that these technologies won't be free. A world will emerge where only the rich can afford to join the exclusive, genetically modified club. These GM humans will be healthier, smarter, and therefore inevitably become wealthier. They'll form a tightly knit elite who sensibly stick to their own kind, viewing unenhanced commoners purely as a threat who will dilute their expensive genetic investment.
So we reach the end of our explainer with a pretty chilling reality. The human race threatens to permanently split into 2 distinct biological species based entirely on wealth. It's deeply, structurally unfair. But here is the final provocative thought I want to leave you with. Even knowing how unfair this biological polarization is, if you had the money, would you really be willing to deny your own child those massive advantages? Where exactly will you draw the line for your own family?